Do you believe in ghosts? I never did until that night. My daughter-in-law had been dead for months, yet she came back. She crept into my grandson's room while we were sleeping and left a bag of candy on his pillow. At first, I thought it was just a dream, until a few nights later she came into my room. This time, she pressed a knife against my throat, her eyes cold, her smile human, but her soul rotten. That was the moment I knew she wasn't a ghost. She was something worse. A living demon wearing the face of someone I once loved. And if you're wondering how I survived to sit here and tell you this story, leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share because what happened next will make your heart stop. It was Christmas Eve. The snow outside fell so softly that it looked like powdered sugar drifting from heaven. The wind chime on the porch sang in slow rhythm, a sound I had always found comforting. I was in the kitchen pouring hot water over chamomile tea, the scent wrapping around me like an old blanket. My house was quiet just as I liked it. Only the soft purring of my cat Lulu and the steady breathing of Max, my golden retriever, sleeping by the fireplace. But then came that sound. A cry. Faint at first, then sharp, cutting through the stillness like a cracked bell. It was Marcus. My heart tightened. That boy rarely cried in his sleep. I set the kettle down, still whistling, and hurried up the stairs, each step echoing louder than it should. Something about that sound filled me with a strange fear. Not the kind of fear that makes you scream, but the one that makes your knees weak because your soul knows something isn't right. When I pushed open his door, the little reindeer-shaped nightlight was still glowing beside his bed. The walls shimmered with its golden light like a quiet winter story frozen in time. Marcus was sitting upright, his pajamas soaked with sweat, his small chest rising and falling too fast. His eyes were wide open, staring at the far corner of the room as if someone was standing there. I went to him slowly, trying to calm my voice, though my hands were trembling. I brushed his hair away from his forehead and whispered that everything was all right, that Grandma was here. But he didn't calm down. He looked at me, really looked as if checking if I was real. Then before I could ask anything, he threw his arms around my neck and buried his face in my shoulder. His voice was shaking, barely a whisper against my skin. "Grandma, I saw Mommy." I froze. The world seemed to stop for a moment. The only sounds left were the wind chime outside and the beating of my heart. Marcus was still shaking when he spoke. "Grandma, Mom just came to kiss me goodnight. She told me not to tell anyone." His voice wasn't dreamy or confused the way a child sounds after waking from a nightmare. It was clear, calm, and far too certain for his age. His small hand clutched the blanket, and with the other, he pointed toward the window. My eyes followed his trembling finger. The window was slightly open, letting the cold night air slip inside. Snowflakes drifted across the sill, melting as they touched the wood. And then I saw them, two small footprints, faint but real, pressed into the layer of snow on the windowsill. Fresh. Wet. My body froze. For a second, I couldn't even breathe. I walked closer, every step careful, as if moving too fast would shatter the fragile silence of the room. The marks were too small to belong to an adult man, yet too neat to be made by an animal. My heart began to pound again, louder this time. I turned back to Marcus. His eyes were wide but steady, his little chest rising and falling in rhythm with the storm outside. "What was she wearing?" "Honey," I asked, trying to sound gentle, though my voice cracked. He answered without hesitation. "A red coat, Grandma." Her hair was down just like in the picture in the living room. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier. I wanted to tell myself that Marcus was only dreaming, that maybe he saw a reflection or a shadow. or something else. But the footprints were there. And Marcus wasn't the kind of child who imagined things. Then came the final blow, quiet but sharp as ice. "She said she will come back soon, Grandma, as long as you don't tell anyone." The words sank into me like a knife. I felt the blood drain from my face. The window creaked in the wind, and for a moment I thought I saw something red at the edge of the trees outside. I blinked, but it was gone. I turned on the lamp beside Marcus's bed, and the room filled with a warm amber glow. That was when I noticed a small, shiny bag resting on his pillow. Candy, but not any kind of candy I'd ever bought. The packaging shimmered under the light, a foreign label printed in Japanese characters I couldn't read. It was sealed neatly, almost lovingly, the kind of product you'd only find in big cities or airports, not in our quiet little town in South Carolina. I frowned, my fingers brushing over the smooth surface. It was still slightly cool, as if it had just been placed there. Marcus was already half asleep again, his breathing slow and steady. I didn't want to wake him, but something about that bag made my stomach twist. I lifted it carefully, my hand trembling just a little. The faint scent of vanilla drifted up, sweet, heavy, unmistakable. My heart dropped. It was the exact same scent that Sabrina used to wear in her makeup studio. The same scent that clung to her scarf, to the pillow in the guest room she once stayed in, to the last Christmas card she ever sent. I swallowed hard, staring at the innocent-looking bag. It shouldn't exist here. It couldn't. Sabrina was gone. The police had returned all her belongings months ago after the accident on that frozen highway. There was no way this candy could have come from her, unless someone wanted me to believe she'd come back. The air felt suddenly colder. I glanced toward the window. It was still open, just a crack, and the snowflakes outside swirled in the wind like silent whispers. Then from the corner of the room came a low growl. Max. He wasn't barking. He never barked without reason, but the sound came from deep in his chest. His fur bristled along his spine as he stared at the window muscles, tense. I whispered his name, trying to calm him, but he didn't move. His eyes were locked on the same spot Marcus had pointed to earlier. The silence pressed down on me until I could hear the ticking of the old clock downstairs. I could smell the faint trail of vanilla still lingering in the air. My fingers tightened around the candy bag, the plastic crackling softly in my hand. It felt like holding proof of something impossible, something that refused to stay buried. I stood frozen, the bag of candy trembling in my hand. Sabrina Vaughn. My daughter-in-law had been dead for 3 months. The words echoed in my head as if I were hearing them for the first time. Dead. 3 months. Yet the candy was new, untouched, spotless. I remembered that day vividly, the one that broke my son. Trevor had been sitting on the porch steps when the sheriff's car pulled into the driveway. I was pruning the hydrangeas, humming to myself, unaware that life as I knew it was about to split in two. When the officer handed Trevor the letter, he didn't even open it at first. He just stared at the official seal as if it could disappear if he blinked. Then his knees gave out. He sat down right there on the cold wooden steps, covering his face with both hands. I can still hear the sound he made, not quite a cry, more like something inside him collapsing. Marcus was standing by the door, clutching his toy truck, asking over and over, "Where did Mommy go?" The police said it was a loss of control on a frozen road, a single car accident. The flames were so intense the body was nearly unrecognizable. They only confirmed her identity from the documents found in her purse. There was no viewing, no open casket, just ashes delivered in a sealed box, and a formal report that ended with cause of death accidental. Sabrina's family refused to let us attend the funeral. They said Trevor had caused too much pain already. I never knew what they meant by that, and I didn't have the strength to ask. The last words I heard from them were cold and final. Please do not contact us again. And now here I was, holding something that shouldn't exist. The bag was clean, almost new. The surface caught the light, and faintly, just faintly, I could see smudges, soft outlines of fingerprints. My heart began to race. My years as a veterinary technician came rushing back, the training and observation, the cases I'd assisted, where evidence spoke louder than words. This wasn't imagination, this was physical, real. I stared at those fingerprints until the room seemed to tilt slightly. Someone had touched this recently, someone with skin warm enough to leave a mark. And if that someone was Sabrina, then death had not taken her as completely as we were told. My hands were still trembling when I reached for the phone. The thought formed in my mind before I could stop it, sharp and terrifying. I think my daughter-in-law isn't dead. The words sounded insane even in my own head, but the candy, the footprints, the smell of vanilla, none of it made sense otherwise. I scrolled through my contacts and pressed Nathan's number. He was the son of my oldest friend and now a young detective in the neighboring county. A few months ago, he'd brought me a wounded stray cat, and I had helped stitch it up. That small act had made us friends. Tonight, I needed more than friendship. I needed help. The call connected, and my voice came out shaky, almost whispering. Nathan, it's me, Tessa. I think something's wrong. I think Sabrina might still be alive. For a moment, there was only silence on the other end. I could hear faint static, the low hum of his car radio, and my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. Finally, he spoke, his tone calm but serious. Miss Donovan, don't touch anything. Keep the area exactly as it is. I'm coming over right now. I hung up, my thumb cold against the screen. The house felt heavier somehow, the air thick with unease. I locked the front door, then all the windows, making sure each latch clicked firmly. Max followed close behind, sensing my anxiety. He stayed beside me as I sat down in front of the fireplace, his head resting on my knee. The fire crackled softly, but instead of comfort, it only made the silence louder. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying the faint chime of the wind bells on the porch. It almost sounded like footsteps, faint, rhythmic, growing softer, then clearer again, like someone walking in slow circles around the house. I tried to tell myself it was the wind, but my body didn't believe it. I turned toward the window. The snow outside gleamed under the pale moonlight, untouched, except for one detail that made my breath catch. There, near the hedge, was a single fresh footprint. Small, neat. The shape unmistakable, a woman's boot. The sound of the clock ticking on the mantel grew painfully loud. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I held Max a little closer, whispering his name just to hear my own voice. Then I looked again at the window, half expecting to see a shadow. Nothing moved, but I knew deep down that something or someone was out there. This Christmas Eve would not be a peaceful one. I raised my son Trevor alone after a bitter divorce that left me with nothing but an old car, a few veterinary textbooks, and a promise to never let him feel abandoned. He was 4 when his father left. I remember the morning clearly, the slammed door, the echoing silence, and Trevor standing in his pajamas, holding his toy fire truck, asking when his dad would come back. He never did. From that day on, it was just the two of us against the world. I worked long hours at the veterinary clinic, cleaning cages, treating sick pets, learning the weight of both life and loss. At night, I would help Trevor with his schoolwork, teaching him that strength wasn't about fighting, it was about caring. Working with animals taught me that survival instinct never lies. A dog's eyes will tell you more truth than a person's smile. Over time, I learned to read fear, guilt, and affection in a glance. That skill stayed with me far beyond the clinic. It helped me see the things people tried to hide, the hesitation in a voice, the shift in posture, the way silence can scream louder than words. Trevor grew into a good man, kind, brave, patient. He joined the fire department right after high school, saying he wanted to save lives like the people who once rescued our old apartment from burning down. I still remember standing on the sidewalk years ago, clutching him tight as the flames climbed higher, and realizing that courage wasn't something you're born with. It's something you choose again and again. Every time he came home from work smelling of smoke and ash, I would patch his uniform, sewing each tear by hand. He would joke that I was his second line of defense after the fireproof gear. But deep down, I knew he was the one keeping me safe from loneliness, from fear, from fading into old age. I was never rich, but I was steady. I paid off the mortgage, kept full health insurance, and set aside enough savings to live without asking anyone for help. Independence became my quiet pride, my invisible armor. I never owned luxury things, but I owned my dignity, and no one, not even death or deceit, could buy that from me. Sabrina. My daughter-in-law was beautiful, the kind of beauty that filled a room before she even spoke. She was young, confident, and knew exactly how to turn a glance into attention. A makeup artist by profession, she had the kind of hands that could make anyone look flawless, though sometimes I wondered if she used that same skill to mask herself. Trevor met her during a charity photo shoot for his fire department. She was there to handle the makeup, laughing easily with the crew, her bright red lips matching the fire truck behind her. I still remember the way he looked at her, like a man who had just been rescued from a burning building. I understood it. She was charming, alive, and knew how to make people feel seen. The first time she came to our house, she brought me a lipstick, a luxury brand, she said with a proud smile. I thanked her, though I rarely wore makeup anymore. But what caught my attention wasn't the lipstick. It was her eyes. They moved around my living room like quiet scanners, lingering on the antique clock, the silver teapot from my grandmother, the old painting near the stairs. It wasn't admiration. It was calculation. As a woman who had once spent years reading body language in frightened animals, I could sense it, the hunger beneath the charm. Sabrina had impeccable style, the kind you only see in fashion magazines. Every visit she wore something new: designer shoes, diamond earrings, handbags, from brands that I only heard about on television. She always had an explanation ready. A friend gifted it. She got it on sale. It was secondhand. But even without seeing the receipts, I knew the truth. The kind of luxury she flaunted doesn't come from small-town paychecks. I tried to love her. I truly did. For Trevor's sake. I invited her for dinners, shared recipes, even bought her a set of brushes from a local beauty supply store because she once complained hers were too basic. She thanked me sweetly, kissed my cheek, but her smile never reached her eyes. It was the same smile she used on clients, polished, practiced, perfect. There were moments when I caught her watching Trevor not with affection, but with appraisal, as if measuring how much value he added to her life. Each time, a chill would run down my spine. A mother knows when something isn't right. Beneath her laughter and perfume, there was something cold, something hollow. I couldn't name it then, but I knew. Some marriages begin with love. Theirs began with performance. The downfall came fast, like a storm no one saw coming. One week, Sabrina was posting flawless photos of her clients and their glowing reviews. The next, a video spread online, grainy footage of her being confronted in the middle of a beauty salon. Another woman shouting hair-pulling chaos everywhere. The caption read, "Makeup artist caught cheating with client's husband." Within hours, her business page was flooded with hate comments. Contracts were canceled. The salon terminated her immediately. The glamorous image she'd built collapsed overnight. replaced by public humiliation and gossip that spread through every corner of town. When Trevor told me, I didn't know what to say. He looked exhausted, older somehow. He said he wanted to support her to help her recover, but every word from her mouth was venom. One night, when they thought I was asleep upstairs, I overheard their argument through the thin walls. Her voice was sharp, angry, filled with blame. If you made more money, I wouldn't have to do things like that. I froze halfway down the hallway, heart pounding. Trevor didn't answer right away, and when he finally spoke, his voice broke in quiet disbelief. That's not fair, Sabrina. That's not love. After that night, everything changed. She began coming to my house more often, always with excuses. Marcus needs new clothes. The bills are late. The car broke down. I helped the first few times, but then I noticed the pattern. Every time I gave her something, she came back angrier, demanding more. When I finally refused, she stood in the kitchen, eyes blazing, and knocked over the cup of tea I had just poured. The hot liquid spilled across the table, dripping onto the floor. Her words stung harder than the mess. You're just a stingy old woman who doesn't know how to take care of family. That night, I sat in silence, wiping the floor long after she left. Max watched me quietly from the corner, while my cat Daisy hid under the couch. The next afternoon, when Sabrina came by again, Daisy made the mistake of crossing her path. With one swift kick, Sabrina sent the poor cat tumbling against the chair leg. I heard the soft crack before I could even move. Daisy's paw was broken. I rushed to pick her up, trembling with anger and disbelief. As a veterinarian, I'd seen animal cruelty before, but never inside my own home. That was the moment I realized cruelty doesn't always start with fists. It begins with entitlement, with the belief that everyone else exists to serve you. And that belief I knew could destroy more than just animals. It could destroy people. It happened one gray afternoon in late autumn, the kind of day when the air smelled of dry leaves and rain that never came. Marcus was outside in the yard laughing as he tossed a rubber ball for Max, my old golden retriever who had been part of our family since Trevor was still in his 20s. The dog was gentle and slow these days, his fur turning silver around the muzzle, but he still wagged his tail at every kind word. That day, his paw slipped on the damp soil, and a splash of mud hit Sabrina's new white sneakers. It was nothing, really, just a stain, but the look on her face changed in an instant. Her eyes went cold, her smile vanished, and before I could say a word, she grabbed the broom, leaning against the wall. She swung it hard once then, again the sound sharp and cruel against Max's side. Marcus screamed, his little voice cracking in terror. "Don't hit my friend!" he cried, running forward to wrap his arms around the trembling dog. I rushed out the door, my heart pounding so fast I could barely breathe. I caught the broom midair before it could strike again, my hand stinging from the force. Sabrina glared at me, her lips curled, her voice shaking with fury. "He ruined my shoes," she spat. "Do you know how much these cost?" I looked into her eyes then, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't just anger, it was satisfaction, something dark and strange, as if hurting something helpless gave her power. I had seen that look before, years ago in injured animals that had survived abuse. It was the same mixture of dominance and detachment. Only this time, it was in the eyes of someone standing in my yard holding my broom. Marcus kept crying, his small hands clutching Max's fur, whispering to him that it was going to be okay. The dog whimpered softly, pressing his head against the boy's shoulder. I knelt beside them, checking Max's ribs with trembling fingers. Thankfully, he wasn't badly hurt, but the fear in his eyes mirrored my own. From that day on, I never looked at Sabrina the same way. I started locking the pet pen every time she visited. I stopped leaving Marcus alone with her, no matter how innocent the reason. And I began keeping a notebook in the drawer by the phone, writing down everything I noticed, the dates, the words, the small shifts in her tone. At first, it felt obsessive, unnecessary, but my instincts told me otherwise. Years of working with wounded animals had taught me one rule that never failed: when cruelty shows itself, once it always returns. That notebook, the one I started out of fear, would one day save both me and Marcus. It happened only a few weeks after the worst of their fights. One cold January morning, Trevor came home pale as chalk, holding his phone in both hands, as if it might shatter. "Mom," he said, his voice thin and trembling. "They said Sabrina's dead." The words hung in the air like frost. I asked what happened, but he barely managed to answer. "A car accident on the highway outside Charleston. Lost control. Burned completely. No survivors." That's what the police told him. 2 days later, a formal letter arrived from her family. It didn't begin with sympathy or even acknowledgement. It simply stated that the funeral would be private for blood relatives only. Not even Trevor, her husband, was allowed. I remember reading the letter twice, thinking I had misunderstood. They used words like personal boundaries and family wishes, as if a husband were some stranger standing at the edge of grief. Trevor tried anyway. He drove to the funeral home the next morning, wearing his formal uniform, the one he kept for department ceremonies. When he returned that evening, he looked broken. "They told me to leave," he said quietly. "Her brother said I wasn't welcome." The police officer on duty just looked sorry. He said the family requested privacy. I didn't know what to say. How could a man be turned away from his own wife's funeral? That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after Trevor went to bed, staring at the candle by the window, wondering if grief could ever feel this strange, so sharp yet hollow. The next day, the insurance letter came. I noticed the date issued less than 24 hours after the death certificate. It was from Sabrina's life insurance provider, confirming that the $500,000 policy had already been processed for payout. The beneficiary was listed as Mrs. Ellen Vaughn, mother of the deceased. I stared at the paper for a long time. $500,000. Approved and released almost instantly. No investigation, no DNA confirmation, no delay. I had worked with forensic vets long enough to know how long identification usually takes when a body is burned. At least a week, sometimes 2. But this was done overnight. I didn't tell Trevor what I suspected. He was already drowning in guilt, convinced her death was his fault. But deep inside me, something cold began to take root, a quiet, unshakable unease. People die. Paperwork takes time. Yet in Sabrina's case, both came too fast. After Christmas Eve, the house no longer felt quiet. It felt watched. It began with small things, the kind most people would dismiss. A faint knocking in the middle of the night. A soft creak near the back porch when the wind was still. At first, I told myself it was the cold wood expanding or the neighbors taking out trash late. But denial doesn't last long when your instincts start whispering that something isn't right. The first time it happened, I woke around midnight to a soft tapping, 3 slow, deliberate knocks against the back door. I froze. For a moment, I thought I had dreamed it. But when I pulled the blanket away and listened, there it was, again the echo of knuckles against wood, steady and unhurried. I grabbed my robe, turned on the porch light, and stepped carefully toward the kitchen. The dogs were already alert. Max, my retriever, growled low in his throat. The cats had vanished under the dining table, their tails puffed up like bottle brushes. When I opened the door, the world outside was white and still. The snow was fresh, untouched, except for a set of footprints leading up to the door. Women's boots. Small, narrow, perfectly imprinted on the powdery snow. My breath clouded in the cold air as I followed them with my eyes. They stopped just at the edge of the porch and turned back toward the woods. Whoever had been there hadn't stayed long. The next morning, I told myself it was probably some passerby, maybe a neighbor dropping off a late card. But by the second night, I couldn't pretend anymore. The same knocking returned soft, measured, familiar. When I swung the door open this time, there was no one there, only the faintest trace of scent in the air. A perfume I knew by heart. Chanel Coco Mademoiselle. Sabrina's perfume. It hit me like ice water. She had always worn too much of it, that bold, powdery sweetness that lingered in every room she entered. Even years after her passing, I could still recall how she'd laugh, saying, "If people can't smell me, what's the point?" That scent now hung in the air, faint but undeniable, teasing memory and fear alike. Then I saw it, something glinting near the fence under the moonlight. I walked closer, my feet crunching over the snow. A broken pearl necklace scattered like tiny frozen tears. My heart twisted. Sabrina had owned one just like it. She wore it to the salon the last day I saw her alive. I stood there in the cold, holding one of the pearls in my trembling hand. Around me, the air was thick with her scent, the night utterly silent. And for the first time since she died, I whispered into the darkness, "Sabrina, what are you trying to tell me?" When I asked Marcus again about that Christmas Eve dream, his shoulders tensed the way they do when he's afraid of disappointing me. He looked down at his hands, twisting his fingers together, and said softly, "Mom told me not to tell you. She said you don't like her anymore." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My heart clenched as if someone had reached inside and squeezed it tight. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I forced my voice to stay calm and gentle, but inside me a storm was building. Sabrina wasn't just haunting our nights, she was poisoning my grandson's heart. I asked Marcus what else his mother said. He hesitated, then opened the drawer of his bedside table. "She gave me this," he murmured, holding up a small plastic bracelet, bright blue with tiny stars embossed on it. "And candy. She said it's from California." The bracelet gleamed under the lamplight, innocent in appearance but strangely out of place. I knew every toy, every piece of clothing, every trinket in this house. I had never seen this one before. I took it from his little hand and examined it closely. The inside had faint letters, Kids Joy, followed by a serial code. My stomach dropped. That brand wasn't sold anywhere near South Carolina. It was an exclusive children's accessory line from a boutique chain in California. I remembered because I'd once looked it up online years ago when Sabrina bragged that her cousin owned one of the stores there. I smiled faintly to reassure Marcus, telling him he did nothing wrong, that Grandma was just curious. Then I tucked him back into bed, brushed his hair from his forehead, and stayed there until he fell asleep. When I finally left his room, I could barely feel my legs. I went straight to the cabinet in my study, the one where I used to store patient records when I still worked at the veterinary clinic. Inside was a small metal box with a lock, my evidence box, as Nathan once jokingly called it when I helped him with stray animal cases. I placed the bracelet inside next to the sealed bag with the candy. The plastic clicked softly as the box closed, but in my ears it sounded like the latch on a cell door. I stared at it for a long moment, then whispered to myself, "If she's really alive, she won't touch Marcus again." I carried the candy bag into my study, the house quiet except for the soft breathing of Max near the door. Habit took over before fear could. I opened the drawer where I keep my old supplies from the clinic and slid on a pair of thin nylon gloves snug over my wrists, the powdery feel familiar like an old uniform. The desk lamp threw a clean circle of light across the wood. I set the bag within it, steadying my hands with a slow breath the way I used to before handling samples. The plastic was slick and cool. I angled it and saw a cloudy smear near the top seal, an oval ridge with faint whorls. Skin oil fresh enough to bloom under light. Not memory, not ash, not the ghost of a woman already buried in paperwork and pity. I lifted the zip edge with a sterile tweezer, careful not to create my own smudges, and eased the seal open a quarter inch. A sweet rush of vanilla rose out, cloying and heavy, the same scent that used to linger on our guest pillows after her visits. Inside the bag near the corner, where the candy had shifted, a faint film caught the light, like the sheen you see on a counter after someone touches it with lotion on their hands. I noted the time in my pocket notebook. Then I saw it. A single hair trapped in the tiny crease of the zip, stretched along the seam as if trying to escape. Long brown with a coppery glint when I tilted it under the lamp. I felt my heartbeat slow with focus. No panic now, just the work. I slid a glass vial from the kit, the kind I once used for biopsy shavings and dental fragments. I coaxed the hair free with the tweezers, lowered it into the vial, and capped it tight. A strip of clear tape sealed the lid to the neck. I wrote the date, the hour, and the location on a small label, then pressed it smooth with a gloved thumb. The bag went into a separate envelope, its opening taped shut, edges signed across with my initials. Chain of custody, even if the chain was only me. I took photos from every angle, front and back seal and corner, then close shots of the smear and of the hair in the vial. My phone buzzed once with some holiday ad I ignored. I opened my email to Nathan, attached the images, and typed a subject line that said, "If you still think I am imagining things, then look at this." I read the words twice, felt how steady they sounded, and sent the message. When I peeled off the gloves, I could still smell the vanilla, faint but stubborn, like a hand that had just touched my house and dared me to call it a dream. I locked the samples in the metal box and sat very still, listening to the winter wind press its face against the glass, certain that what I had found was alive in the only way that mattered. I called Nathan that night, my voice barely steady enough to explain what I had found. He didn't question me, didn't laugh the way some might. He only said, "I'll be there first thing in the morning." True to his word, by 8 a.m. the next day, his old police-issued SUV was parked in front of my house. He came in carrying his laptop, a portable drive, and a thermos of black coffee. The moment he stepped inside, Max wagged his tail once, then went quiet. Animals always sensed tension before people did. Nathan sat up on the kitchen table, his fingers moving fast over the keyboard. "Let's start with the neighborhood cameras," he said. Our block had an old community surveillance system installed years ago after a break-in spree, outdated but still functional. I made him tea, though neither of us touched it. The screen flickered as he scrubbed through hours of static footage from Christmas Eve. Snow fell endlessly on the grainy feed, white dots on black night. Then at 11:37 p.m., the motion sensor triggered. Nathan froze the frame and zoomed in. A figure crossed the far end of the street, just inside the halo of a street lamp. The image was blurry, but clear enough, a woman in a red coat walking toward my property line. My throat tightened. "That's the exact time Marcus said she came," I whispered. Nathan didn't answer right away. He replayed the clip twice, slowing it down. The figure stopped near our mailbox, turned her head toward the house, then vanished beyond the frame. When he spoke again, his tone was low, careful. "Tessa," he said, "I checked the official death record for Sabrina Vaughn before coming here. Something's wrong. The file lists cause of death as vehicular accident with burn trauma, but there's no DNA confirmation. No dental comparison either. The ID was made only from her driver's license and a wedding ring found at the scene." The words felt like ice sliding down my spine. "So they never proved it was her," I said. Nathan nodded grimly. "And the coroner's signature? It's from a temporary contractor, someone not even licensed in the state when the report was filed. I can't say it for sure yet, but it looks fabricated." I sat there staring at the frozen frame of the red coat on his screen. The edges of the image flickered, as if she were still moving, as if she were just waiting for us to blink so she could disappear again. My heartbeat drummed in my ears. If what Nathan said was true, then Sabrina hadn't just faked her death. She had help. Someone with access, someone who wanted her gone from the record, but not from the world. When I finally told Trevor everything, he stared at me like I had spoken another language. "Mom, she's gone," he said, shaking his head. "I signed the death certificate myself." His voice cracked on the last word, as if saying it out loud might make it truer. But I could see in his eyes the exhaustion of a man who wanted to believe in peace, not ghosts. I told him about the candy, the bracelet, the fingerprints, the camera footage. The more I spoke, the more his face tightened until frustration took over. "Mom, are you hearing yourself?" he snapped. "Sabrina was buried. We saw the urn." I didn't argue. Instead, I walked to my study and unlocked the metal cabinet. Inside were the sealed bags, the candy, the photo printouts, the blue bracelet. I laid them out on the kitchen table like quiet witnesses. Then I showed him the still image from the surveillance video, the red coat frozen mid-stride beneath the street lamp. For a long moment, Trevor said nothing. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the screen. His breathing slowed, then he exhaled sharply and pressed a hand to his forehead. "That perfume," he muttered. "I smelled it last night near Marcus's room. I thought I was imagining it." Neither of us moved. The clock ticked once, twice. Then small footsteps padded across the hall. Marcus appeared, clutching his blanket, his eyes half awake. "Dad," he said softly. "Mom's still here. She told me she'll take me to her new house soon." The words fell into the room like stones dropped into deep water. Trevor froze, every muscle in his face tightening. I reached for Marcus, instinctively pulling him close, feeling his tiny heartbeat against my chest. Trevor looked at us both. His son's innocence, my fear, and something inside him cracked. He stood silent and went to the window. Snow was falling again, covering the faint footprints from the night before. After a while, he turned back and said quietly, "I'll stay here tonight, just in case." We made up the guest room, but none of us slept. Every sound, the creak of the stairs, the groan of the wind, the distant chime of the clock, felt heavier, closer. Trevor sat in the living room beside the fireplace, his old fireman's jacket draped over the chair. I stayed by Marcus's bed, holding his hand as he drifted in and out of dreams. That night marked a shift I could feel in my bones. It wasn't just about Sabrina anymore. Something unseen had entered our lives, deliberate and patient. As the embers dimmed and the house fell silent, I knew whatever this was, it had only just begun. Nathan came over the next morning, his face pale from lack of sleep. He didn't bother with greetings this time. He dropped a manila folder on my kitchen table, its edges worn and creased, like something that had passed through too many hands. "I got into the accident file," he said quietly. "And what I found doesn't make sense." I pulled out a chair and sat down while he opened the folder. Inside were copies of the official police and coroner reports, each stamped and signed. But the closer I looked, the more wrong they seemed. The entire case was handled by a rookie investigator, Nathan explained, tapping the signature at the bottom, a temporary hire. Someone who shouldn't have been assigned to an unconfirmed death. His voice carried that mix of disbelief and anger that only comes from discovering rot inside a system you once trusted. He flipped through his pages, pointing at key lines. "Look here. No DNA results. No dental chart comparison. The body was never identified through any biological means." He turned another page showing a photo of a burned leather wallet. "This," he said, "is what they based the ID on. A wallet found at the scene with Sabrina's driver's license and her old employee badge inside. That's all." I stared at the image, the charred edges, the melted corners, and felt a cold sweat spread across my back. "So there's no proof the body was hers," I murmured. Nathan nodded grimly. Not a single fingerprint matched hers. And there's more. The coroner's note on page 3 was edited. Someone crossed out a line and rewrote it in pen. It says, "Body severely burned, impossible to identify by visual means." That's not standard phrasing. It's the kind of line you add when you want to close a file quickly. The kitchen felt smaller with every word. The clock ticked somewhere behind me, loud and steady like a pulse. I leaned back, staring at the papers spread across the table. "You think she switched places with someone?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Nathan didn't answer immediately. He closed the folder, pressing his hand on top of it, as if to keep the truth from spilling out. "I think whoever died in that car wasn't Sabrina," he said finally, "and someone wanted it to look like she was." The room went silent. Outside, snow kept falling soft and indifferent. I couldn't move. A chill crept down my arms as the reality settled in. If what Nathan said was true, then another woman had died in Sabrina's place. And Sabrina, the same woman who once smiled across my dinner table, who had looked me in the eye and called me Mom, was alive, walking free somewhere wearing a new name. Nathan came back 2 days later with another file thicker than the last. His face was grim, his jaw tight, the kind of expression he wore when he had found something he wished he hadn't. He placed the folder on the table and said quietly, "It wasn't Sabrina's car." I blinked, not understanding. He opened the file and turned the papers toward me. The vehicle involved in the crash was a rental from Roadshore Rental, booked under a different name, Lydia Marlowe. The credit card, the insurance, the paperwork all belonged to her. He flipped to the next page, a photo of a woman taken from an old ID card. The picture showed a tired face, thin and weathered, but with the same general features as Sabrina. The same brown hair, the same build. Lydia Marlowe. Nathan continued, was a homeless woman from Charleston. No family, no fixed address. She disappeared a few days after Sabrina's supposed death. My stomach tightened. Nathan kept going, his tone steady, but his eyes heavy. I cross-checked social media records. 2 years ago, Sabrina filmed a charity makeup video. You remember those? The ones where she helped transform women in need. I nodded slowly. He turned the laptop toward me. On the screen was a paused frame from one of those old videos, Sabrina smiling for the camera, standing beside a shy, fragile-looking woman sitting in a salon chair. The caption read, "Giving confidence to those who've lost everything." Nathan zoomed in. The woman in the chair was Lydia Marlowe. I pressed a hand to my mouth. "She knew her," I whispered. Nathan nodded. "And she used her." He moved to another section of the report. The toll booth camera picked them up together the night of the accident, 9:42 p.m. 2 women entered the same car. One in a red coat, one wearing a gray hoodie. But only one body was found inside that wreck. He paused, letting the words sink in. The passenger side door was unlocked when first responders arrived. No footprints in the snow leading away, but that could have changed after the fire trucks came. If Sabrina walked away that night, she had a good 10-minute head start before anyone arrived. I could feel my pulse pounding in my throat. "You're saying she planned all this?" I asked. Nathan's expression didn't change. Every piece of it he said. The rental car, the substitute victim, the false ID. It wasn't a random tragedy, Tessa. It was a staged disappearance. Someone built a perfect cover, and that someone was Sabrina Vaughn. I sat back in my chair, too stunned to move. The woman who once called me Mom had orchestrated her own death and stolen another woman's life to do it. The thought hollowed me out. It wasn't madness. It was calculation, deliberate, methodical, and cold. I asked Nathan to look into the insurance payout. It was a thought that had haunted me ever since we discovered the inconsistencies in Sabrina's death records. If she truly wanted to disappear, she'd need money, and $500,000 could buy a brand new life. Nathan agreed to check, though he warned me that accessing LifeShield's internal system without authorization was risky. "I'll keep it quiet," he said. "But if what you're thinking is true, this isn't just fraud, it's conspiracy." 2 days later, he showed up at my house again, his laptop tucked under his arm and a grim look on his face. "You were right," he said before I even spoke. The claim went through too fast. He set his laptop on the table, turning the screen toward me. The insurance payout, $500,000, had been processed just 2 weeks after the so-called funeral. Normally, Nathan explained, LifeShield requires at least 30 days to verify a death, sometimes longer if the body isn't identified by DNA. But this claim was approved on the 8th day after the accident. I frowned. 8 days. How is that possible? He scrolled down to the internal audit notes. "It's only possible," he said quietly, "if someone inside LifeShield pushed it through." The primary beneficiary listed was Sabrina's mother, Ellen Vaughn, the same woman who had refused to let Trevor attend the funeral. But one transaction stood out among the digital trail: an internal transfer of $120,000 from Ellen Vaughn's account to another name. Chase Larkin. Nathan read aloud, labeled as consulting service. The words hit me like a stone. "Who is he?" I asked. Nathan sighed. "Chase Larkin is a fixer, a paperman. Used to work in claims verification, got caught manipulating files for fake deaths and payouts. He was investigated 3 years ago for insurance fraud, but never charged." Everything was dropped quietly. My blood turned cold. "So you're saying he helped her fake this?" Nathan nodded slowly. "It fits. He would have known exactly how to falsify the report, how to make the claim look legitimate, and how to make the payout move through without raising red flags. If he was paid $120,000, that's not consulting. That's silence money." I sat there numb, my fingers curling around the edge of the table. The numbers on the screen blurred until they became meaningless shapes. $500,000. Paid out for a woman who was still breathing somewhere, a woman who had traded someone else's life for her own freedom. The room felt colder than before. I could almost hear Sabrina's voice in my head, sweet, polite, rehearsed. She hadn't died. She had evolved, transformed. And now she was out there living off blood money, bought with deceit and a dead woman's name. Nathan sent me the footage late that night. The email had no subject line, just a short message. "Watch this. Don't panic." My hand trembled slightly as I clicked the link. The video was only 10 seconds long, taken from a neighbor's security camera across the street. The image was grainy, blurred by snowfall and the flicker of the porch light, but the moment I saw the silhouette, my breath caught. A woman in a red coat walked into the frame, her head covered by a hood. She moved slowly, carefully, her steps light on the frozen pavement. Even through the haze of the footage, I recognized it, that subtle sway to the left, with each step, the faint limp that never fully healed after Sabrina sprained her ankle years ago. My heart pounded in my ears. It wasn't just someone who looked like her, it was her. She carried a small handbag, the same beige satchel with gold clasps that I'd seen dozens of times, sitting on her vanity table. I remembered it clearly because she once bragged it was imported from Milan, though later I found out she had bought it secondhand online. Every detail in the footage screamed familiarity. Nathan had slowed down the clip frame by frame. The timestamp read December 24th, 11:36 p.m. The exact time Marcus claimed his mother had come to see him. The camera's angle faced my house from across the street, capturing the front yard and part of Marcus's window upstairs. At the 6-second mark, the woman stopped. She didn't move closer. She just stood there, looking up at that window, still deliberate like someone assessing the scene. The wind lifted the edge of her hood for half a second, and though her face was shadowed, the curve of her jaw, the tilt of her neck, they were all unmistakable. For nearly a full minute after the recorded clip, motion sensors continued to detect presence, but the image faded. By the time the next camera picked up movement, she was gone, melted into the night as quietly as she had arrived. I called Nathan immediately. His voice was calm, too calm. "She wasn't there to haunt you," he said. "She was checking in, watching how you'd react. People like her don't return out of guilt, Tessa. They return to confirm their success." His words sent a chill straight through me. Sabrina wasn't haunting her family, she was studying us, testing whether her illusion had worked, whether we truly believed she was gone. And the worst part, she was right. We had believed it every tear, every sleepless night, every prayer whispered over a lie. I sat on the edge of the sofa and let the pieces fall into place, one slow, cold shard at a time. The footage, the bracelet, the candy, the fingerprints, and the hair in the vial all pointed the same way. She was not gone. She had staged a death and walked away. The old threat she had once thrown at Trevor came back to me with new weight. "If you try to kick me out," she had said, "I will make your family lose everything." At the time, I had dismissed it as spite, as the venom of a woman desperate and exposed. Now I understood it was a promise, and a detailed plan had been laid long before the crash. I remembered smaller things I had overlooked. She had asked about Trevor S. life insurance policy months earlier, a question that had struck me as odd then. She had asked casually, with the smooth smile of someone collecting information. I chalked it up to curiosity or greed, but it was preparation. She had learned the numbers, the beneficiaries, and the timelines. She had the knowledge to turn an accident into a disappearance and a disappearance into a payout. The insurance payment trail, the transfer to Chase Larkin, the rushed claim, all fit a map drawn by fingers that did not tremble. Walking through the house that afternoon, I cataloged the signs like a detective and like a mother whose instincts had sharpened into a weapon. A curtain pulled slightly off track in the living room, the back door lock bearing a shallow scratch that had not been there before, a plain envelope left in the mailbox with no return name inside. I opened it with shaking fingers and found a single folded scrap. The words on it were simple. "Merry Christmas, Mom." For a second, the handwriting looked almost tender. Then I thought of the bracelet and the candy and the footprints. The tenderness was an act. The note was a dare. Fear settled in my chest, but it was edged with a clear, hard resolve. This was no longer a ghost story I could pray away. This was intentional and criminal, and the law would have to pay attention if we did not. If she had indeed gone to the trouble of staging a charred body and buying silence, she had also arranged to come back and test us. She wanted to know whether her disappearance had stuck, whether the family would accept the lie and move on. Her return on Christmas Eve was not to haunt us with memories. It was to measure our belief. I thought of Marcus and how easily a small voice can be convinced. I thought of Trevor and the raw look he gave me when he learned the claim had been paid. I thought of the animal instincts that had guided me my whole life, the ones that teach you to watch, to take notes, to gather proof. My hands no longer shook when I picked up the phone. I called Nathan and told him to come over and to bring every contact he had in the county and at the insurance company. I told him to be discreet and to be fast. If she was returning for money or for revenge, I would be the first to make sure she paid for stealing a life and trying to steal mine. I moved from fear into a kind of fierce, practical calm. I called Nathan and told him to bring everything he had, and he arrived with a toolbox, a stack of cameras, and a quiet, professional manner that steadied me. He did not ask for permission to take over. He simply unpacked and began. We walked the perimeter together, and he pointed to the places that mattered then, to the places an intruder might think were safe. He set up a camera at the front door with a wide-angle view that would catch anyone lingering on the porch, and another at the back with infrared that could see in the blackest hours. He tucked a tiny lens into the eaves where it was nearly invisible, and he mounted a small infrared dot aimed at the back gate where Sabrina had stood. Each device was mounted low enough to be hidden high enough to be safe from casual reach. Nathan explained how he would link each feed to my phone and how each clip would be stamped with the time and encrypted to a cloud server outside the county. He said that if anything happened, we needed a chain of custody that could not be argued away. I nodded, trying to absorb each detail, and he showed me how to toggle alerts so my screen would light up the instant a motion sensor tripped. The first time I felt that notification ping, an odd calm spread through me. The house felt less like a fragile bubble and more like a shield. We also installed door sensors that would report a tiny chirp to my phone if a latch moved. Nathan tested them, walking to each door and opening and closing, while I watched the icons update on the app. He set sensitivity so that a raccoon would not trigger a false alarm, but a human step would. He set a 20-second delay on some cameras so that if someone tried to trigger an alarm to blind the system, the feeds would still capture them moving in. He called that redundancy, and I liked the word. Nathan advised creating a baited area, a place that looked easy to access, but was actually covered by the best camera. He helped me move an old potted fern to the corner near the side step and left the curtains slightly parted there. He told me that people who come uninvited tend to go for the obvious path. He said if Sabrina or anyone else tested our doors again, they would likely step into that visible blind spot, and then we would have the clearest picture possible. I felt my mouth firm with resolve as he described it. This was not trickery. It was protection. By dusk, the ring of eyes around the house was in place. The feeds were live, and the app sat on my phone like a small, vigilant face. Each camera had a timestamp and an encrypted cloud ID that Nathan wrote down, and I signed my initials across the mounting tape to show the seals were intact. I practiced the alert routine until the motions became automatic. I told Marcus he could sleep in my room tonight, and Trevor agreed to rotate shifts with me. We would not be alone. I did not feel safe in the old, warm way I remembered from before all of this. I felt protected in a new, hard way. I had built a net of sight and sound. If someone came for money or for vengeance, they would walk into witnesses. If they tried to gaslight us or to claim we were imagining what we saw, the timestamps and the encrypted files would answer for us. I would not go quietly into being a victim. I would watch, and I would wait, and I would be ready. I decided to act the part of an old woman who had been broken by grief, slow in step and soft in voice, so Sabrina would think I was easy to push around. I wrapped a cardigan tighter around my shoulders and moved deliberately, letting the house hear the creak of my joints, the small sighs when I sat. I answered the phone in a tremble. I misplaced my reading glasses on purpose, and I left a bowl of cookies on the kitchen table, as if to invite friendly visits. All of that was theater. Behind the tired gestures, I was preparing evidence with the precision of a surgeon. I placed the sealed candy bag, the blue bracelet, and the little glass vial with the hair into a clear plastic evidence bag and labeled it with the date and time. I photographed the items from several angles on my phone, then transferred the images to an encrypted folder and copied them to the metal evidence box. Each label I wrote in careful block letters, my initials across the tape, to show I had not tampered with the seal. In the living room, I hid a tiny digital voice recorder in the decorative bowl on the side table. It was small enough to be overlooked, and it recorded constantly, timestamping the audio so each sound could be matched to the video feeds. I practiced how to cough just loud enough to make Sabrina comfortable, and then how to lower my voice into a false frailty. When she came by and complained, or when she tried to charm Marcus with lies, every word would be there. The thought steadied me more than prayer. I called an old friend from the clinic who now worked as a registered nurse, asking her for a favor. She came the next morning and examined Marcus carefully, as gently as if he were a patient. She charted the rate of his pulse, noted the small tremor in his hands, and photographed a bruise that had not been there before. She wrote down everything in a formal note dated and signed, and she agreed to act as a witness should we need medical testimony. Her professionalism turned my maternal fear into recorded fact. Nathan advised that we send the hair and the fingerprint samples to the county forensic lab. He explained the tests, how mitochondrial and nuclear DNA would be analyzed, and how the lab would compare any profiles against the national database and against Sabrina's personnel file, if available. He also stressed chain of custody protocol, telling me to document every transfer, every pair of hands that touched the sample. I trained my hands to move with care, to place the bagged evidence into an outer envelope that I then handed to Nathan in front of his laptop while he logged the transfer. He wrote the exact time and uploaded the hash of the photographic metadata to a secure server so nothing could be altered without leaving a record. I felt small doing these things, but the smallness was a cloak that hid a fierce resolve. The recorder hummed quietly in the living room. The sealed bags waited in the locked metal box, and the nurse's notes rested folded in my desk. If Sabrina tried to gaslight us or to return with a new story, we would have words and timestamps and signed medical notes. This was not revenge yet, it was preparation, and it felt like armor against a woman who had already learned how to vanish. I decided to turn my apparent weakness into a strategy, using small acts of theater to provoke a reaction. I moved slowly and made noise with purpose so anyone watching would think an elderly woman lived here alone, vulnerable and easy to fool. Trevor agreed to play along, speaking loudly on the porch about a safe in the cellar and about papers that supposedly proved ownership of the house. The story was a fiction, a planted rumor meant to tempt anyone listening to act in haste. I chose details that sounded real but were meaningless in law, a baited tale that might draw out greed or fury. I dressed the part each morning, choosing clothing and jewelry that suggested small, precarious savings. I put on a deep neckline sweater and wore costume necklaces that flashed when I moved as if modest wealth sat inside the house. I left a ledger open on the kitchen table with plausible names and numbers, and I placed a folded map with a marked storage unit where a visitor could easily see it. I baked cookies and left the jar half full, a homely sign meant to lower defenses and invite casual visits. I practiced stumbling steps and a breathy voice so my act read as real to anyone watching. All the while I watched through a prepared lens, cameras and motion sensors feeding every ping to my phone. When an alert arrived, I stilled and watched the feed reading movement, like a strategist reads a battlefield. Each ping was information, a tiny signal about who had eyes on us and what they planned. The performance was a way to pressure someone into making a move that could be documented for the police. The tactic had a second aim: psychological pressure designed to expose intent. If Sabrina watched, she would see me as exposed and as carrying small, visible value, and that perception would tug at her worst instincts. Greed makes people act quickly and sloppily, and anger makes them act bluntly. Either response would leave traces, and those traces would form a pattern worth recording. The charade felt degrading at times, but it worked. Within days, small signs appeared, a footprint in the side garden, a curtain thread pulled a wrapper like the foreign candy I had found before. Each trace answered the bait proof that someone had tested the house. I recorded, cataloged, and waited for a pattern to emerge. Performing weakness cost me dignity, but it became a means to trap truth and evidence that law could use to protect my family. I trained my face to show tremor, yet my hands learned steadiness when handling evidence. Trevor and Nathan checked feeds at odd hours while Marcus slept nearby. I took comfort in small confirmations. A motion alert or a new footmark became a victory. I learned that acting could be a shield that staged weakness, could force a predator to reveal itself and let the law act. I would not yield. I slept very little the night Nathan outlined the plan, but when morning came, I felt strangely steady, like a woman who had chosen her ground to stand on. Nathan explained the sequence once more while we walked the perimeter, his voice precise and unhurried, the kind of voice that makes you trust the step after it. The rule was simple and terrifyingly clean. If any camera caught Sabrina or anyone acting with criminal intent, he would have officers in plain clothes ready to move. He had coordinated with a supervisor at the precinct and put a call into the district attorney's office. They had agreed to stand by until we had an observed crime in progress, something undeniable. Nathan stressed that they needed probable cause on camera, not rumor, and he arranged for backup units to be on call within 20 minutes, with formal probable cause affidavits pre-drafted to present to a judge if the situation escalated. We set the bait carefully. Trevor would announce to a few trusted neighbors that he intended to pull the proceeds from the house sale and keep the cash in a secure deposit box for a short time before final closing. The rumor was deliberately specific and mundane, designed to sound believable to anyone listening, and yet thin enough that if anyone tried to act on it, they would be committing an obvious crime. We did not broadcast it on social media or tell friends beyond the circle we trusted. The idea was to tempt greed, not to boast. I felt ridiculous as Trevor practiced his lines, saying the words in a loud voice while I pretended to listen and feign confusion. But even the tiny performance made my pulse quicken. Nathan prepared the legal side with a calm efficiency I admired. He had drafted arrest affidavits and a search warrant template that could be adapted to accounts or physical locations if financial crimes were underway. He explained how insurance fraud and money laundering could be pursued in parallel, how the DA's office might execute a simultaneous raid on bank records if the camera evidence showed a handoff or a clear theft. He advised patience and strict procedure because the law in these matters is merciless if you let it slip. No vigilante moves, no rash confrontations. Let the law record the crime and then let the law act. That afternoon, we walked the route Trevor had mentioned to the neighbors, and I planted small, believable signs that cash might be near the surface. A ledger open on a kitchen table, a locked travel case left in plain view in the guest room, an offhand comment about withdrawing funds said loud enough for anyone outside to overhear. Each item was an invitation and a test. Nathan watched the feeds with steady eyes, and an officer sat in an unmarked car down the block, ready to move if the cameras recorded the wrong set of feet. I did not relish the idea of luring someone into criminality, but the thought of Sabrina or an accomplice reaching into my home or taking Marcus terrified me more. If she or they stepped across the line, the camera would show it. Nathan would act, and the DA would have the paperwork to seal the case. I would not take revenge by hand. I would hold evidence like a ledger and hand it to the law and let justice do its work in daylight. It happened at 11:37 p.m., the exact time that had haunted me since Christmas Eve. I was sitting by the fireplace pretending to read when my phone vibrated with a sharp notification. The motion alert flashed red rear door, movement detected. My pulse jumped. I tapped the screen, and the live feed from the infrared camera filled it. The grainy black and white image showed a shadow gliding along the fence line, moving with the precision of someone who knew every inch of the property. The figure paused, crouched, then reached for the back door. I saw the faint gleam of metal, a lockpick, and then with practiced ease the latch gave way. My breath stopped. She stepped inside the frame, the red coat unmistakable even through the camera's night vision filter. Her movements were light, confident, familiar. Sabrina. From the patrol car, parked 2 houses down, Nathan was watching the same footage in real time. His voice came through the radio clipped to my pocket, calm but charged with urgency. "Tessa, stay put. Do not engage, we're moving in." I whispered a quiet acknowledgement, though my throat felt dry. Outside, the world was silent, the kind of silence that hums before a storm breaks. On the screen, Sabrina opened a small purse, pulling out a flashlight, no bigger than her palm. She shined it briefly over the kitchen counters, scanning as if she were looking for something specific. Then her hand froze over the jar on the table, the decoy candy jar Nathan and I had placed there days ago. She picked up one of the shiny wrappers, turned it under the light, and smiled faintly. It was the same brand Marcus had mentioned, the one she'd used to lure him before. The camera above the eaves zoomed automatically, capturing her face, just enough to identify the curve of her cheek and the scar near her left brow. Every sensor in the system came alive at once. Timestamp, audio sync, metadata, all feeding to the encrypted server Nathan had set up. I could even hear faint rustling through the microphone, her whispering something under her breath, maybe cursing, maybe gloating. My heart hammered so loud I thought it might set off the motion alert by itself. Nathan's voice returned, firm but quiet. "We have visual confirmation. Officers are closing in from both sides." I clutched the edge of the table to keep my hands from shaking. Through the living room window, blue and white flashes began to dance faintly against the walls, and still I couldn't look away from the screen. Sabrina moved toward the hall, her red coat brushing against the doorway. She looked around once, as if sensing eyes on her, then reached into her purse again, this time pulling something that glinted like a small knife. That was when Nathan's command voice broke through the radio, sharp as thunder. "Now move." I sat perfectly still in the dark, the house breathing around me in quiet, steady rhythms. The only light came from the soft glow of the security monitor on the coffee table, casting faint shadows across the room. I had turned off every lamp, every flicker that could give away my position. The plan depended on patience, on silence. From the outside, the living room looked peaceful, a grandmother asleep in her chair, the family dog curled nearby the house, resting for the night. From the inside, it was a trap, wired with sight and sound. Max lay under the table, his head on his paws, his breathing shallow. He had learned the stillness I needed. Upstairs, Marcus slept soundly, or so I hoped. The soft rhythm of his nightlight pulsed faintly on the baby monitor beside me. Everything was set. One wrong sound, one creak in the floor, and Sabrina would know. I steadied my breath and let my eyes half close, pretending to drift. But my ears strained toward the faintest sound, the latch, the door, the whisper of a shoe on the floor. In my lap was a small recorder already running. Its red light was covered with a strip of tape, invisible in the dark. Every second of silence was being captured. Every whisper would be preserved. Nathan had told me that in court, words could carry more weight than blood. A threat spoken aloud, a confession, even a careless boast, those things could convict. I thought of Sabrina's voice in my memories, dripping with sweet contempt, saying she would make us lose everything. If she said it again tonight, I would have proof. I remembered Trevor that first night he moved back in. He had tried to sound calm, but his hands trembled when he set down his duffel bag. He'd said, "Mom, I'll sleep downstairs just in case." though we both knew "in case" meant fear of her, of what she might do, of what he had once refused to see. I had told him no, that he should stay with Marcus. But I knew that if danger came, he would run down those stairs before I even called his name. The clock ticked softly, each second a heartbeat. I counted to keep from shaking. My thoughts circled back to the purpose that had kept me awake for weeks. I wasn't doing this to hurt her, not really. I was doing it to end the cycle, to expose the truth. Revenge was a flame that burned everything, but justice was light. It showed what was hidden, and that was all I wanted. For once, I wanted the truth to stand taller than fear. I shifted slightly, careful not to make the chair creak. The air in the room felt charged, expectant, like the few seconds before lightning strikes. I glanced at the monitor. The motion sensor flickered faint movement near the back hallway. My pulse quickened. She was here. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready. The moment she pushed through the back door, I knew the quiet had been a lie. The red coat was no longer a costume of a visitor. Her face had changed into something harder, eyes wild and focused like a trapped animal. She did not hesitate or look like someone ashamed. She stormed into the living room, and her voice cut the dark like a blade. She called me a filthy old woman and demanded that Trevor come home or she would kill me. The recorder in my lap was running, and every syllable slid into its little memory, a cold ribbon of proof. She drew a knife so fast it smelled of metal and adrenaline. The cold tip pressed at my throat. I felt it on my skin, and I felt the old animal parts of me flare up. Fear was a quick, bright thing, but under it was a fierce calculation. This was attempted murder with a weapon. That thought steadied my hands in a way I did not expect. I let my face go slack, let my voice thin and tremble, as I had practiced to keep Marcus safe and to buy the seconds Nathan needed to act. Sabrina reached up and grabbed at my chair, leaning in as if to make the threat more real. She shouted that she would take Marcus and that she wanted money, that if we did not hand over the cash from the supposed house sale, she would take my grandson and make us suffer. Her words hit like stones. I felt bile rise, and the fragile theater I had been keeping almost shattered. Yet the recorder caught the exact phrasing, the threats, the tone. That recording would be a map of intent in a courtroom. At the first noise upstairs, I knew she meant to go for Marcus. She moved toward the stairs with a predator's grace knife held low so she could spring. I could see the memory of Marcus sleeping in the glow of his nightlight, the small shape of him trusting the world. I pictured Trevor bursting through the front door. I pictured the neighbors hearing and coming out. Those images pulled me like ropes. I hissed a soft, useless sound that I hoped would delay her a breath, meant to keep my chest from betraying panic. Trevor did not hesitate. He had been waiting in the hallway, listening to the microphones and watching the monitors, like a man with one hand on a fuse. He barreled into the room in a rush that was part rescue and part fury. He grabbed Sabrina's wrist, tried to wrench the knife away. The chair slid. The lamp-tipped plastic toys skidded across the rug. Marcus woke, crying out, and the sound of him made Sabrina twist like a cornered thing. She snarled, tried to wrench free, and reached for the stairs. Nathan and the team hit the back door in a controlled swarm. Shouts commanded her to drop the weapon. They moved in with training and restraint, 2 officers taking hold of an arm, another coming to stand between Sabrina and the stairs. Neighbors appeared at the windows, faces pale and eyes wide. The cameras had captured every step, every look, every movement. Her attempt to flee toward the yard was blocked by officers who knew the exits from the feed and by the ring of witnesses who had already dialed emergency. She fought and screamed and called Trevor every name she had used before, threats, laced with hysterical promises. But with hands on her and cuffs sliding home, she could no longer make good on any sentence. As they led her past the living room, I watched her only for a moment, and then I looked at Marcus. He clung to Trevor, his tiny body shaking. I felt the long line of the night snap and unresolved things gather like winter clouds, heavy and dangerous, but for now, the immediate terror had been stopped. The sirens faded into the background as the sound of authority took over, calm, sharp, absolute. Two officers pinned Sabrina's arms while Nathan read her rights in the steady voice I'd come to recognize from his years in the force. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The red coat that once made her look glamorous now hung awkwardly off her shoulders as cold metal cuffs clicked shut around her wrists. Her face twisted between fury and disbelief, as though the script she'd written for herself had suddenly been rewritten by the law. Nathan moved quickly and methodically, his every action deliberate. He picked up the knife first, sliding it into a clear evidence bag with a gloved hand. The candy bag went next, sealed and labeled. Then the blue bracelet and the strand of hair that I had preserved weeks before the final pieces of the puzzle. Each item was tagged time-stamped and logged into the official chain of custody. No rumor, no he said, she said. Just facts, sealed and signed. The sound of the seals being pressed felt like the closing of a chapter I had feared would never end. While the officers documented the scene, Sabrina began shouting again, her words tumbling into panic. Her attempt to redirect blame only solidified the truth the scheme had been deliberate. The admission about faking her death came through distinctly, the phrase that would later anchor the case for the prosecution. Nathan shot me a quick look that said everything we got her. Upstairs, Marcus stirred awake from the noise. When the social worker and the young public attorney arrived, I held my grandson close as they gently asked him to describe what he saw. His voice was small but steady. She came back. She had the red coat. She gave me the candy and said not to tell Grandma. The entire exchange was recorded per child witness protocol, with both a legal observer and social worker present. I watched his little face in the glow of the camera, realizing that his courage would carry weight in a court of law. The truth had come from the most innocent voice in the house. Outside, neighbors had gathered, drawn by the flashing lights. One of them, a retired teacher named Grace, held up her phone and began recording the arrest from her porch. By morning, the video had already spread online. The local news played it under the headline, "Woman who faked her death arrested for attempted murder and fraud." In every frame, Sabrina's downfall was plain to see: the cuffs, the red coat, the fury on her face under the porch light. I didn't smile. Not yet. But I felt the quiet satisfaction of something restored: dignity, justice, and the certainty that truth once caught on camera could never be buried again. The next morning dawned gray and cold, as if the sky itself wanted to stay silent until justice spoke first. By noon, the district attorney's office had issued a formal indictment against Sabrina Vaughn. The charges filled an entire page: insurance fraud, falsifying official documents, embezzlement, attempted kidnapping, making criminal threats, elder abuse, and child endangerment. Nathan had called early to confirm the news, his voice steady, but laced with a quiet satisfaction. They moved fast, Tessa. The DA wants to make an example of her, he said. For the first time in months, I allowed myself a full breath. The law was moving, and this time it wasn't moving against me. At the interrogation room, the tables had turned completely. Nathan and the investigative unit presented new evidence that tied Chase Larkin directly to Sabrina's financial scheme, emails, transaction logs, and a transfer note matching the $120,000 payment labeled as consulting services. Chase was subpoenaed that same day, his face pale in the photo that flashed across the evening news. He looked nothing like the confident man who had once helped Sabrina stage her fake death. Now he was another name on a growing list of accomplices. The DA's office was preparing to file conspiracy charges against him as well. Sabrina tried to twist the narrative in desperation. Her lawyer arranged a short video statement for social media, hoping to paint her as a victim. In it, she claimed she had been forced by Chase and driven by fear, her tone wavering between tears and self-pity. But the footage from the night of her arrest told a different story. Her voice yelling threats, her hand gripping the knife, her admission of guilt captured by multiple sources. The physical evidence spoke louder than her rehearsed emotion: the candy bag with her fingerprints, the hair sample that matched her DNA, the bracelet tied to her purchases in California, the money trail that ended in her own account. Then came Marcus's testimony, delivered through a carefully managed child witness process, and the live stream from that night, the images of her red coat, the police warning the moment the cuffs clicked shut. No narrative could survive that. The press ran headlines with words like "shocking betrayal" and "woman who faked her death faces justice." Her defense crumbled, not under argument, but under the weight of proof she could not erase. That afternoon, I stood in the courthouse hallway, the polished floor reflecting the flash of cameras from outside. Through the glass doors, I could see Sabrina being led into the preliminary hearing hands, cuffed, hair messy, her once proud stride reduced to a shuffle. Reporters surrounded her, shouting questions she couldn't answer. The red coat she had once worn as armor now looked like a mark of shame. I didn't feel triumph, not the kind that hurts. What I felt was quieter, the deep, steady relief of balance being restored. Justice didn't roar or demand applause. It simply walked into the room, patient and unshakable. And for the first time since that terrible night, I knew I could go home and finally rest. Karma did not take its time. It arrived swiftly in broad daylight, with cameras rolling and the truth impossible to deny. Within a week, Sabrina's name was everywhere, on the evening news, the front page of the local paper, and across social media feeds filled with outrage and disbelief. The headline read, "Woman who faked her death to steal insurance money arrested on Christmas night." It spread like wildfire, and every share, every comment seemed to echo one message: no one can hide from justice forever. The district attorney's office pressed full charges: insurance fraud, falsifying identity, kidnapping, elder abuse, and assault with a deadly weapon. The case was airtight. The video of her breaking into my house, the recording of her threats, the physical evidence Nathan had cataloged, each piece stacked neatly against her. The footage of her screaming with the knife still in her hand played on courtroom screens during the first pretrial hearing, and the public gasped. Even the judge's expression hardened. The ripple effect hit her family next. Her mother and brother, who had quietly received the insurance payout, were placed under investigation for conspiracy and fraud. The $500,000 policy that had once been their silent victory was frozen pending recovery. Their bank accounts were seized, their homes searched. What had started as greed disguised as grief became a scandal that stripped them of everything they thought they'd won. The media followed the story relentlessly, labeling it the Christmas deception. Trevor stood taller through it all, though the strain showed in the tightness of his jaw and the deep lines that hadn't been there before. The court granted him full custody of Marcus, citing Sabrina's criminal record and the emotional harm she had caused the child. He sold the old house, the place that had witnessed too many arguments, too many ghosts, and used the money to settle debts and start anew. We moved together into my smaller cottage near the woods, where mornings began with birdsong and ended with the quiet purring of our cats by the fire. Marcus slowly found his laughter again. He ran barefoot in the garden, fed the birds, and slept without nightmares. Sometimes he would ask if the police had taken the lady in red far away, and I would nod, saying softly, "Yes, and she won't come back." He seemed to understand in the way children do instinctively, without needing details. At night, when the world went still, I would sit by the window watching the snow fall, feeling the balance return. I didn't feel vengeance. I felt release. Sabrina had lost everything: money, reputation, freedom, and in losing it, she had given me back what she'd tried to take peace. A few quiet months passed and life found its rhythm again, softer, slower, almost tender in its simplicity. I sat on the porch that spring afternoon, the wooden floor warm beneath my feet, watching Marcus scatter birdseed across the yard. His laughter blended with the flutter of wings, and somewhere behind us, Trevor was fixing the old doghouse, humming an old tune he used to play on his guitar. The air smelled faintly of pine and soil, the scent of things healing, of home, rebuilt not from walls but from peace. The world had moved on from the story that once consumed the headlines. The name Sabrina Vaughn had faded from the news cycle, replaced by newer scandals, fresher crimes. But for us, the memory lingered, not like an open wound, but like a scar that told the truth without bleeding anymore. Every creak in the floor, every flicker of red in the winter light, reminded me of how close darkness had come to our door and how far it had been pushed back. When the next Christmas arrived, snow blanketed the ground just as it had the year before. But this time it felt different, gentler, quieter, almost forgiving. Marcus sat by the window, his small hands cupping a mug of cocoa, his eyes reflecting the glow of the tree. He turned to me and asked softly, "Grandma, do you think Mom is still somewhere?" I looked at him for a long moment before answering. There was no anger in my heart, no bitterness left. Maybe I said with a smile that was part sorrow, part peace, "But if she is, she can't hurt anyone anymore." He nodded, accepting that answer with the innocent wisdom only a child can have, then turned back to the window, watching the snow fall like feathers. Later that night, after the house had gone still, I put on my coat and stepped outside. The moon hung low, lighting the frozen river that wound behind our yard. I walked to the edge and dropped a single candy, the same kind she once used, into the water. It hit the ice with a soft clink and stayed there, a small, bright mark against the dark. I whispered, "For the souls that still can't let go." The wind carried my words away, maybe to no one, maybe to her. I didn't need revenge anymore. I had closure. What she took, the truth, gave back. And as I stood there under the cold, infinite sky, I realized that survival wasn't just about living through something, it was about choosing peace after it ended. If you've ever witnessed deception hiding behind the mask of family love, tell that story. Because truth, no matter how deeply it's buried, always finds its way back on the coldest night.